Hi, this is Tim from timraddy.com talking to you about dynamic data masking. Dynamic data masking has been available in SQL Server since SQL Server 2016, as well as Azure SQL Database. This is a neat feature that allows you to mask how data appears in the result set without actually having to change the data within the database. So it's a nice way to be able to protect data that people don't need to see the full account number, social security, or whatever that value is. So let's get started. I'm going to use AdventureWorks. It's just one of the sample databases I've been using for many years. So we'll make sure the context is in AdventureWorks. I'm going to create a local user, DDM user for dynamic data masking user, and then going to grant select on various tables that I'll be demoing with. All right, first thing I want to do is alter table person.email address. So maybe you don't want to expose the full email address to everyone within the company if they don't need to see that value, but it's exposed in, say, your application or report or whatever system is in use. So we're going to go ahead and alter this table and the column email address. We're going to use the built-in function called email. So now if I execute this as the DDM user, we can see the first initial, then all x's at x's.com. Maybe we want to use the default. So we're going to change and alter table person.email address and choose the function default. And now it should be all x's. So depending on the data type, the default value could be x's, could be zeros. It all depends on that function. Now let's look at the production.product table. This time we're going to look at standard cost, and I want to show you one of the risks that I've encountered with using dynamic data masking. So if we query based on the DDM user who is masked, we can see standard cost $11.52. If we query without that DDM user, so admins, so keep in mind standard cost has values for these first few rows. If we look at the actual data, that standard cost is 0 for like the first 180 plus rows. So a risk here is if you're masking data with a realistic looking data, if someone within your organization that's not aware that they're looking at masked data runs this query, they could be making business decisions based on incorrect numbers or wrong data. So I always caution this and like to demo this, that if someone's covering for someone that's on PTO, they run this query for the first time, they don't know that it's masked data, provide that spreadsheet to someone else that is making business decisions, it could be bad. So my standard is I like to mask data with something that's clear that it's masked, like X's and things like that, or all zeros. So how do you remove masking from a user? So I'm going to grant unmask to the DDM user. Now we'll query that email address and product. We can see we have full email addresses and we see that standard cost back to zeros. So how do you revoke or unmask? The unmasking is to revoke unmask to the user. Now let's look at another fun one. So let's say you don't want to use default, you don't want to use the built-in email function and various things. You want to get creative. So you can use this partial. So I'm going to inject 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the product number. So we'll create this rule and then take a look. So we can see AR12381, BA12327. The actual data is AR-5381, BA-. Common question comes up is there a limit here? And it's like, no, I could just click on the keyboard a few times, make this really long. Since this is a masking rule that's applied to the result set, it doesn't matter so much what the data type length is because we're not actually changing the data itself. It's just what appears in the result set. So this one's fun. You can get creative and come up with things. This is usually fairly common if you have something that could be short names. You can go and mask, make those something else. Another type situation is something that you can mask. So we can make the data not appear as the actual data. So we can mask account numbers, social security, we could mask. In this case, we're going to mask salary. So I'm going to go in here and look at the employee pay history, the rate, and I'm going to set it to default and then query. So now we can see their national ID number, first name, last name, their login, what their title is, date of birth, which is something we would want to mask maybe, date of birth, but the pay rate. So I chose default, so it's all zeros. Well, if I can query based on what I'm masking, so in this case the rate, if I can filter on that, then I can run still as the DDM user where rate greater than $100 an hour, and we have the CEO listed. So do I know what the CEO makes? No, but I know they make more than $100 an hour. What about 125? So query again, Ken Sanchez still shows up. What about 126? Does not show up. So make somewhere between 125 and 126. So if we execute as an administrator, let me drop this back down to the 125. We can say makes $125.50. So if your users can filter on what you're masking, over time, if they can query it enough, they can narrow it down. So this is a potential exploit or workaround with the dynamic data masking. But typically in the real world, in their application, they're not going to be filtering on that. It's going to be a field that's included by some developer in a report or an application that they just, quite frankly, don't need to see. How do you view what has masking rules on it? You can query the sys tables or sys mask columns, join to the sys tables, and I can see product number, standard cost, and so forth, and what those masking functions are. How do you remove those? You just go through and alter the column and drop the mask, and then we'll drop the user. All right, another example I want to kind of show off is I have some SSRS reports. So I went through and just queried the person.email address. And what I wanted to show is real world example. So in this case, let's imagine that there's additional rows in here and it's data that I want to see, but my particular job function, I don't need to see email address. So I don't need the risk of someone in my job function going and running this report and being able to save it off and now have my entire customer list, their email addresses, and be able to go start spamming them or signing them up for whatever. So I can go back into Management Studio and I'm going to mask the email with the email function. So I go back to my report, I refresh, and we can see just like we saw in Management Studio. And now if I were to save this off, I'm not going to have everyone's email address. Similarly, if I do the default, it should be all X's, and go back and refresh this report. So in my experience working in various corporations, many times the application that end users are using expose a whole lot more data because the developers that have written that software package, they didn't base it on role-based authentication and access, and it's revealing account numbers, it's revealing email addresses, it's revealing maybe social security numbers and things. And my background was finance, worked for a bank for 18 years, and I saw that a lot with various teller type applications where the teller line really didn't need to see so much information versus the people working at the desk in the branch that would open new accounts and service those accounts. Those at the teller line just taking the money, making deposits. They didn't need to see phone numbers and email addresses and things like that. Account number, yes, to key it in, bank balances and so forth, but they're not ones that are editing a person's account. So they didn't need to see full social, all of those types of things. So based on their role, we could have limited their access had that been a SQL Server 2016 or newer backend. So it's a really neat feature to be able to implement to help protect your data and be part of your security posture where it's applicable. Hope you found this useful, and maybe you'll go and experiment around a little bit with dynamic data masking. Thanks for watching.